What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P and Shannon White here with a Steelers Global Perspective encore episode. Because of Thursday Night Football, you didn't get your full hour with Matty and Shannon, and so we thought we'd give you a little bit more. Thought we'd give you something outside of the context of the Patriots game. Now, you're listening to this. We're recording this before the Steelers play the Patriots. So we're going to have a few caveats on everything that we say where, maybe the Steelers won and things look better. Maybe the Steelers lost and things look worse than where we're seeing it. But Shannon, you had a really interesting show on Steel Curtain Network where you write articles. You're on at least two shows, right? Am I right in saying that? Two shows? The Pump Your Brake show, and then you do the Hangover show with Daniel J. State of Steelers. I more just in how my week goes managed to get to listen to the Hangover more than I do Pump Your Brakes. Really interesting discussion that you had with Daniel this week, and particularly around the coaching staff. And I just, I would have loved to have been in the live chat for that, but I thought, you know what, rather than even ask questions in that live chat, I love to talk to you about that sort of stuff. So I wanted this encore episode focused on a little bit the state of play when it comes to the Steelers, where we're at as an organization, because even though this season can still be successful, this season they can still make a playoff game, win a playoff game. That needed to be the goal. Like, there's still a possibility of those things happening right now. Mm-hmm. But we are, we're 12 games, 13 games into this thing, and by the time people listen to this, and it's, a lot of people calling it the wasted year because we've not maybe been able to make an evaluation on Pickett. The Steelers are clearly a minimum 25% improvement away from, being a real Super Bowl contender. So my first question to you is, what's the number one priority for this Steelers team to get right in this offseason?
Well, when the Steelers were winning, and it was like with smoke and mirrors, again, the first 10 games of the year, they were outgained in all 10 games. They were the only team with a winning record that had a negative scoring margin on the year. Those things usually signal a bad football team. But they were able to overcome because they protected the football and on offense, and they were one of the least penalized teams in the NFL. And they were opportunistic and created a lot of turnovers on defense. So I was probably about week 5, I started commenting about issues. And everybody and I'd write about it. And people would be like, well, you're complaining and they're winning. Just win, baby. The only thing matters is winning.
No, well, we saw that. We saw that with the 11-0. That doesn't mean
that's not really accurate. What matters is improving. Either you are a contender or you're striving to become a contender. The only way to become a contender is through player development, personnel usage, excellent coaching, and improvements, sustainable improvements on offense and defense. Well, the Steelers have struggled with that in recent years. Their drafts have been ineffective under Colbert towards the end. Well, we've seen this year a really strong draft with Omar Khan and Andy Weidl at the helm. So I feel very positive about the future. Well, the coaching has obviously deteriorated because we brought in buddies. We brought in familiar. Yeah. And so Mike Tomlin is a player's manager in that he needs the horses to be successful. Well, if you have a few bad drafts or mediocre drafts, it affects roster.
And they've had about 7 years of mediocre, probably up until this point.
Yes.
Up until this point, yeah.
So, and then you have to have player development for the guys who do make it. Well, we've had some weaknesses in position coaches. There's been some changes and some turnover. But the main, in my opinion, deficiency has been an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator.
Yep. I've been saying for almost 2 years now, Austin's not it.
So I think that we're focusing right now. Too many fans are focusing on. First, it was Matt Canada, which was a no-brainer. He had to go.
Yeah.
But now it's all on Pickett, Kenny Pickett. But they're not realizing that's one man off a whole roster. And they're like, well, they would have compared him with anybody that has a good game. Jake Browning for the Bengals has a good game. Then, oh gosh, Browning's better than Pickett. Joshua Dobbs has a couple good games.
I find this funny. Like, I want your perspective on this because you've watched a million more hours of football than me. But like, people have short memories. Like, Terry Bradshaw had 22 interceptions in his rookie year, right?
Yeah.
Like, Peyton Manning had 22 interceptions as well. And I've said for a lot up until about the last couple of weeks, if you actually look at Kenny Pickett, he is not only recently has he played a full rookie season's worth of games. Yeah. For all intents and purposes, the guy's a rookie that's like, and last year, the training camp and OTA work he got was, let's call it virtually nothing. Like, you know, if he'd played for Ohio State or Georgia, like he would have had the exact, like it wouldn't have been that much more experience than he would have got there, right? I know it was with an NFL team, but let's be honest, when you're the third string quarterback, I mean, the way Mike Tomlin talked about this week with Rudolph, like he did not go into that season remotely prepared, right? And we know the Steelers are poor at this because they didn't even have a quarterbacks coach for a number of years because they had Ben, which is stupid because what if Ben got injured, you know, first came into a playoffs and he was out for 1 week and you've got to win a play. Like, that's one of the things that I find very interesting about the NFL compared to a lot of other professional sports, particularly if you look at it like, say, to the English Premier League, right? Where you have a group of players that can go out and win you games. So sometimes it's very fixed in the NFL. People, the concept of depth, I find sometimes is very perplexing in how it's considered. But when I look at Pickett, like going back to that, the guy's barely played. He's not even played 20 games because of like when he's been knocked out. And that's the latest. Oh, Kenny Pickett gets, you know, he's too injury prone. I'm like, the guy's diving into a line full of a bunch of blokes because his offensive line can't block to save their life. And suddenly that's his fault. Like, if he didn't try and do that, like, I feel like Kenny Pickett has got more flack for trying to dive and score a touchdown with his ankle than Deontay Johnson cops for not even diving on a fumbled football. You know what I mean? Like, I find like, I can't understand it. Like, there are people that out there, and I think the Steelers fan base as a total, and maybe it's just the loud people on Twitter, right? But for the last 15 years, basically, since the Steelers won a Super Bowl, there has been a reason to complain about every single quarterback. All the off-field stuff with Ben. Then Ben's too old. Why would you draft Landry Jones? Mason Rudolph's not the guy. Why would you waste a third-round draft pick on him in Ben's twilight years? Then it's Trubisky's not the guy. You should never have got him. Oh, you drafted Kenny Pickett like in the same offseason, who was the highest-rated quarterback in that draft. But you got a pick number 20. You overreached on him. It's like, yeah, maybe he had a second or a third-round grade on Kenny Pickett. But you get a 5-year deal at a time when the quarterback has never cost more money on contracts and it's going to average 50 or 60 million. So if you get a guy that's a top 16 quarterback, top 50% quarterback, and you can pay him less and you've got a winning team around him and you win a Super Bowl that way, well, great work. Like, you know, like, so I just find it, I find it so interesting that Pickett can be the basis of all evil in this team. Like, I find that perplexing.
Well, I was saying, and we started talking about Pickett. The team has so many issues right now that needs to be addressed before you can accurately evaluate what you really have, not just in Pickett, but, you know, I mean, across the board. When we talk about Pickett, you was mentioning, you know, Bradshaw and Manning. Well, you look at just some recent examples, Josh Allen. People forget, why did Josh Allen magically in his third season improve so much? They got Stephon Diggs. They got him some weapons. They got him a new offensive coordinator.
Well, the other thing that I talk about as well, is a lot of people overlook, and I've heard it talked about with Josh Allen, and I've said it for probably about 18 months now with the Steelers. The other thing that all of those things happened, of course, which were huge. But the other thing that the Bills did is that they swapped out their center. They didn't have a center that was reliable, and they brought in, I'm going to say it's Matt Paredes, I think, or they swapped him out. I have a mental blank on who it is, but they swapped out the center because they said the center play isn't good enough, and the center is a key position for the rookie quarterback, because if they're not going to block properly and they're not going to snap the ball properly, then there's no ability for Josh Allen to actually sit there and to be able to go back there and survey the field and to become more accurate. And this is one of the things I've said which is why I had issues with Cole last year up until the 5 weeks of the season, because I was like, I don't think he's not the center that is going to be supportive of Kenny Pickett's development. Then he had an okay end of the year, and I was like, maybe he and Pickett can grow together.
I thought the same thing.
The following, this year, and instead it's gone backwards, which is why to me center is almost the most important. Apart from another really good corner, center is the most important position, because this offense is going to go nowhere, even with a new offensive coordinator, if Mason Cole is going to play the way he's played this season.
That's why I wanted Creed Humphreys. But again, I'm not going to get off on that. But I don't know if you got to watch. You mentioned the last 15 years, how with social media and how there's always something to complain about with the Steelers quarterback, regardless. We talk about development and time and the personnel around the quarterback. There's so many things that go in to having a successful quarterback. I don't know if you got to watch the Seahawks and the Cowboys game recently.
I saw part of it.
It was a really high-scoring, exciting game. But, I watched Geno Smith when he was at West Virginia. And he had a ton of talent around him, and he was dominant. And it got him drafted in the second round, I think it was.
Yes, I think so.
And he was disappointed, but I thought it was fair because he still needed development on a lot of his progressions and stuff. Well, it took a while, and New York was not the right place. But he's been very successful. He's been very successful with the Seahawks. The reason I asked if you watched it, hopefully people did get a chance to watch it, because everybody now says, I watched the All-22. I watched the All-22. And I'm like, there's a difference in watching and comprehending.
100%. I hear people say, I watched all 22 and I saw this. And I sit there sometimes, and I was especially with the line play, I'm like, but you don't even know you don't know what, if there's no sound, you don't know what's coming through the mic. You got to understand what you're looking at. 100%.
But what I was going to say about Geno is, if you watch that game, there was so many times that he showed incredible anticipation because he was getting pressured. He had less than 2 seconds to get rid of that football. And he would throw the ball before the guy even made his break. He was throwing to a spot in the end zone. I mean, it was crazy, Matty. He was putting enough arch and dropping that ball, and that receiver knew exactly where he had to get to, and they were complete passes that way. Now, normally it catches up with you, and it did by the end of the game.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that is something that Smith could not have done at WVU. He could not have done his first couple of years. He has developed that level of understanding, anticipation, and communication with his receivers. He has that communication. Right now, Pickett does not have that kind of connection, much less chemistry and communication with his receivers.
No. As I said, I've said this to Mark when Mark and I do the shows on the channel a number of times. I feel like instant gratification of modern society just gives people zero patience, right? You go back and even look at what the Chargers had when they had the best running back in the league. They moved on from Drew Brees, Hall of Famer Drew Brees, and swapped him out for Phillip Rivers because it wasn't enough that quickly. Well, it didn't mean that Drew Brees was the worst quarterback to ever have played the game. Far from it. So let's go back to the player development part. Now, I think when you think about a player manager, this can actually work when you've got the right people around him to develop players. Yes. Now, obviously, Canada, not just the on-field product, the stuff we've heard about who he had in rooms, who he didn't. Like, he kept a very siloed organization and a very siloed relationship with people, even with what Ben said, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would also say that he probably was a bit scared of Ben, but, you know, like, you know, if you're going to be the coordinator of an NFL team, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is back there. You need to be able to put your stamp on it, and you need to be able to have a relationship with them. You can't sit there and hide in a corner.
Yep.
Like, even Goldilocks went into and tasted all 3 dishes for the Bears, right? Like,
yeah.
You know. So I find that an issue. But like, you talked about it with the yes thing. You and I have talked about this for a long, long time, as long as we've known each other. I've talked about it with the Schofield brothers before, off air, or, you know, for almost an hour straight once. Do you think Mike Tomlin is capable? And it's a two-part question. One, is he capable of actually looking beyond the family this offseason and bringing in at least an offensive coordinator if he's not going to replace Terrell Austin, because I don't think they will this offseason? Bring in an offensive coordinator that can bring some fresh perspective that he's just going to have to put some trust in. And the second part to the question is, even if he's not capable, do you think that ownership are going to force that on him?
When Tomlin, there's a big difference in Tomlin when he was a surprise hire by the Rooneys and the Tomlin we see now. We're in a situation now. What's the saying? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. There is nobody with job security on the level of Mike Tomlin. We're talking about a franchise in 53 years has had 3 head coaches.
Yeah.
They do not fire head coaches. Mike Tomlin will never get fired. He might decide to walk away. You know, Noel said, I'm done. Cowher says, I got other things in my life, and I'm walking away. It's going to come down, does Mike Tomlin want to commit? Because I'm sorry, I think we're a little farther away from being a contender. And it ain't because of Kenny Pickett. I mean, you could go get Kirk Cousins this offseason.
Well, I don't know. And people are just paying an extra $30 million a year.
Yeah, well, that, and you've got 2 receivers. You've got you're going to have a new offensive coordinator. You have a very questionable offensive line, especially pass blocking. You're going to have to bring in a drafted guy and probably sign a free agent. You're going to have to, there's more holes than people realize. Cam Hayward, he can't get paid what he's due next year. So there's got to be something there. You might have to trade a guy like Alex Highsmith because you got Herbig. You might have to trade Highsmith to bring in one of these guys you need at an important position of need. Khan and him is going to have to be creative again because it looks like the Steelers are still going to win enough games that they're not going to be picking high in any round. And, that's how bad teams get good. Like the Houston Texans, they make it a crazy trade with the Browns, and they turn all them selections into top players. Then they get the number 2 pick in the draft, and the Panthers crazily. I do not.
I don't know how they picked that. I don't know how
pick a guy that looks like he's in 10th grade, and pass up C.J. Stroud, and now C.J. Stroud. Now Houston's surging. That team's on the rise. And I think the Steelers have a lot of things they're going to have to do to get to where they're a team on the rise. So as far as Tomlin, I question if this offseason, if he doesn't make a decision that he's going to walk away.
But there's that saying in sport, that you're a long time retired. Do you think it's time out? Do you think, like, if you're Mike Tomlin, let's say Mike Tomlin, I'm a bit of a Tomlin fan, right? But let's say you Mike Tomlin, how do I put this? It's going to sound really bad. No, how to put this. So Mike Tomlin talks a lot about winning, and this is it, and the standard's the standard, and we need to do this, and all these sorts of things. If he fully believes all that stuff, that's, to me, I would think that then you've got to work beyond yourself and bring in things like, surely he wants to win one more. Surely he wants to win one more Super Bowl. Like, he's young too, like the guy's got a lot of tenure left. There's a lot of tread on the tires, so to speak. Do you think? And I guess the thing that I bring up when people have been like, fire Tomlin over the last few years. Yeah, so I follow Arsenal in the English Premier League, right? And I followed them for the best part of 20 years. And they got rid of their manager that had been there for 25 years, taken them to the Champions League, finished third or fourth consistently most years. It had an unbeaten season, all the rest of it. They fire the guy, and then they end up 10 out of 20 in the league, 8 out of 20 in the league, 6 out of 20 in the league. That goes on for 5 or 6 years. And now they're back in it this year, and they might win that Premier League title, all things being equal, at where they are at right now. But it's been very long suffering, and it was a lot more painful than a lot of fans realize. So I guess when I think about Tomlin, I'm as a fan that's been burnt for a while by a coaching change, and yet to see the full, I guess, fruits of that change. They haven't won that title, that title yet, and the decision was made to do that for a lot of reasons, and message getting stale and all the rest of it. I guess I've got two sides to the coin of like, is there someone out there we could bring in that's going to make that change? And obviously it's always woulda, shoulda, coulda, ifs in a world of ifs. But I see how cranky the fan base in with a 7-5 record. Mm-hmm. How are they going to feel when it's a losing record? Are we ready? Are we ready as a Steelers community to have losing records to get to the point that we can win a Super Bowl again?
Well, as I've said for a few years now, I want to see sustainable improvements across the organization. That means better decisions from the ownership, from the coaches, better player development, better personnel usage, improvements on offense and defense, to whereas they can eventually, you see a trajectory of them going up that they can be a contender someday. It's just flatline, Matty. It's 8-8. It can't be 8-8 anymore, but now it can be 9-8 or 8-9. But if it's 9-8, they're going to be like, see, never had a losing season. One of the hardest things for anybody who becomes famous is to not read your own press clippings, not to believe that you're the devil or how great they say you are, because it's going to be a lot of one or the other. And I think that the biggest question for Tomlin, he's never had a losing season, but he had a Hall of Fame quarterback, Hall of Fame caliber players that he doesn't have anymore.
Yep.
Is if you've only known success, can you handle failure? And when I mean failure, to me, you said 6-7 wins, let's say. If they have a season, they have 6 or 7 wins. I don't call that a failure per se.
Neither do I.
If you're seeing an NFL caliber offense starting to develop and a defense that these young guys, there's teams in the league right now that are not contenders this year, but you see they're getting better.
Oh, yeah.
Green Bay Packers, youngest roster in the NFL. I did not realize that. They are the youngest roster in the NFL, and they are winning. They're starting to play better every week. They're on an upward trajectory.
But even
when's the last time you could say the Steelers were on an upward trajectory? They're holding even. It's flatline. I'm not a fire Tomlin person either, but something's got to change.
But a good parallel. I said this to Mark a while back when we were talking about somebody else earlier on the season. It's funny, is like the Chargers, right? The Chargers have a much better quarterback than the Steelers. Herbert is a better than pick. I loved Herbert coming out. I thought he was great, right? Like, Michael Beck, ex-BTSC, could talk about Herbert. Like, you know what? I'd sell the farm for him too, right? I do. I think in the right offense, totally. But they're very similar to the Steelers in that there's some good young guys there. There is a lot of veterans on massive contracts that need to move on. And you see the result. But the difference in some ways, I do think, is the Steelers' mentality and coaching versus what you see at the Chargers. That's the only that's worth 2 or 3 wins for the year. But it's whether I guess to me, are the Steelers going to be able to bring in the right people on and off the field, both players and coaching and coordinators, for Tomlin to weather through everything and get there and win with a quarterback that he's had for the first time? Or is change going to come before then? Because that's my thing.
Is he willing to do that? And
I think so.
Then does he want to do that? No, meaning that he will have a losing season. I mean,
if I believe the best in what
is it more about having a winning record and being competitive, or are the Steelers still believe in a championship mindset? Because they do not have a championship mindset.
If I'm Mike Tomlin, yeah, and I think this is the point you're leading to as well. Like we're coming at it slightly in a funny way, slightly differently. If I'm Mike Tomlin, I'm sitting there for the next 5 years and trying to get them to the Super Bowl no matter what it takes, because I want a Super Bowl that no one can say that was Cow's players. Even if I get there and I lose, right? No one can say it was Cow's players. It was Hall of Fame quarterback. That's my team. I did that. I coached them. No, I did that, but I coached them.
He needs that.
And he 100% does. But to do that, winning a game, it goes exactly what you said. Winning games without improving doesn't help you no end to that. No. So it comes down to whether he wants to. To me, I think it's a more binary than I think some people are making out, where it's either in his mind, either he wants to never have had a losing season or he wants to win a Super Bowl. You're going to have to sacrifice never having had a losing season probably to get the Super Bowl. And it's up to which one you want to do. You're in the Hall of Fame. Like, he's in the Hall of Fame. If people hate him, love him.
Oh, definitely.
He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
But and I always talk about this with sport, and I talked about this particularly with Lav Bell. What do you want your legacy to be? Right? Like, I find this funny in the NFL too, right? There's guys out there that seek the money, that have talent. If they're in the right team, they play 10 years. They've got a shot at winning titles and maybe even making the Hall of Fame. And they go and chase the money, and fine. Now, money's important. Don't get me wrong. Money's important. We've all got to eat. We've all got to live. But like, even the cheapest guy in the NFL is making, hundreds of times what the average person makes in any Western country. Like, it's mammoth money, right? And so too, they put their body on the line. The physical, like they make most of them name themselves for life, CTE, all of that. Like, it's completely deserved. But legacy is why, and particularly it's a big thing with men too in masculinity, legacy is really important. And so I think the only person that probably really knows the answer to this, and that's assuming he's thought about it properly, is Tomlin on what's that legacy going to be. But then it also comes down to, what does the organization want to do? Because if the organization keeps doing things like overpaying for veterans to fill a need right now instead of stocking up draft capital and stuff like that, then we've got no chance at rebuilding the thing. And this is where I'm interested what the dynamic is, I'm interested in what the dynamic is between Weidl, Khan, Tomlin, and Rooney. I like Rooney the second, because we don't know that. And that's the biggest thing that influences everything we've talked about.
What I think the Rooneys they give their employees the power to make so many decisions, and they try to stay out of most of it unless they're needed. So therefore, I believe that a lot of these decisions are coming from Tomlin, and then Weidl and Khan with their new scouting department, which I'm very excited about that too. We're going to see improvements now. Like I said, the last few drafts were not good. But I think the Steelers are short-sighted right now. They're not looking at the long game. They're looking, well, what can we do to be competitive next year?
As a franchise?
Yes, because they bring in these veterans, and as you say, they overpay to keep a guy around. They're looking at short-term, not long-term. And it's a long game because it takes a while to build up to be that. Well, they've never completely fallen off, but they're not climbing up either because they won't commit because realizing that they will have to fall off a little bit. As you said, to focus on draft picks and player development, they're wanting to just stay the even kill. They're kind of trying to cheat. The NFL set up for parity. It's set up with the worst teams get the best players in the draft. And the Steelers are trying to cheat. They want to stay competitive and still get lucky.
Because there's only one way.
But what I'm concerned about is the mindset of Mike Tomlin. Everybody knows, and he said it for 2 years. He even said at the end, Ben's lack of mobility was hurting the offense, and he made some comments like that. Well, since Pickett and Trubisky, last year it was ball security. That's continued this year. Now, there's nothing wrong with protecting the football. You should. But if you're overprotective, you don't get any spectacular plays. It hinders player development. It hinders chemistry between the quarterback and the receivers, timing, and being on the same page, hitting these deep passes downfield, chunk plays. And we know already that Tomlin plays conservative. Well, on defense, soft zone. Now, I understand they only have one good press coverage corner, but they didn't really try in free agency at the trade deadline. They had opportunities to bring in somebody, and they really didn't. So, to me, the mindset is the problem because it's a conservative mindset, and they're not fully committing to the rebuild.
Yeah, that's what it feels like because you said cheating the system before. There is one way to try and cheat the system that exists that they don't do. And I was hoping, we've only had one draft really where Khan and Weidel have made all the decisions, and I'm hoping to see differently this draft because of this draft. And that is to trade back and acquire picks. If you really want to cheat the system, you need second and third round picks. And if you look at the teams that have won, I did it going into last year. The teams that won the Super Bowl, it was like it was of the 8 of the 11 teams or something that had been in the Super Bowl the previous decade. I had Pro Bowlers and key playmakers on their teams, most of which were drafted in the second or third round, not the first round, the second or the third round, which is also historically Colbert's worst rounds. If you actually go back and look at it, he can draft the first round Hall of Famer 50%, or a guy that first round, all pro. He did very well in his first 10 or so years, very poor in the next one. I've done plenty of shows on that in the last 3 or 4 years. But if you look at it, the second and the third round is really important. Let's look at this year. The second round, Benton and Porter.
Yeah.
Arguably might end up one day being the best second round we ever had. Right? Maybe. That's what concerns me, because what's the point, as you said there, what's the point in not fully committing to the rebuild? Like, if you're not going to pick top 10 or top 12, really, you may as well pick 3 times in the second round or pick 4 to 5 times in the second and the third round and see who you get. Because we even look at the roster right now. We've got Benton, we've got Porter. Deontay, despite all his crap, was a third-round wide receiver. He's done pretty well for the third round, right? Mason Cole, I don't like him. They think he's serviceable. He was a third-round pick, not by them, but by the Vikings, right? Pat Freiermuth, a second-round pick. George Pickens, a second-round pick. Dan Moore, a third-round pick. I can go through I don't think James Daniels was the first round. I think he was a second rounder.
Second round, I'm pretty sure.
Right? So, I can keep going across the thing, right? But very rarely, TJ back into the first, Minka middle of the first. Obviously Pat P, I mean, he's older. There's no point bringing that into the mix. But you can go through it. They're not Jalen Warren, undrafted, right? And their backup rounds have been poor for about 8 or 9 years. They haven't got players out of the 6th or the 7th round that should contribute, or even the 5th round like they should, right? Look at Herbig, 4th round. So I just sit there and I'm like, if you want to try this dangerous game of, cheating, as you said, cheating the system or trying to win through a rebuild, you got to play the game properly. And that's not picking first round studs that dramatically lift your team from winning a playoff game to making the championship game or making the Super Bowl. We ain't there, as you said. And that's what worries me. And I've said things to this effect for years now, like literal years. And
me too.
Yeah, and that's a bit for me. I was like, at what point are we going to start going? And it's the modern NFL too. That's how the NFL's done.
Yeah, but the key in our hope is Kahn and Waddle, this new scouting department, because I do believe that the Rooneys will back off and allow Kahn and Waddle to do this modernization of the roster building.
So I guess my question is there, and you and I are, at this point we're guessing, but like, what happens when Tomlin's like, no, I need a first round this?
Well, he is so invested in, he has meetings and dinners with the prospects more than any coach. He loves that part. So he has more say in that than any of these other coaches. So a lot of the things we might be blaming Colbert, it might have been Tomlin's favorite.
Oh, I still feel like there was a power. I still feel like Colbert held power. I think Colbert went over Tomlin's head on things. This is the thing for me with Khan. And you'd think Khan was a money guy, would sit there and say, why would we overpay a first rounder to do 10% more production than what we can get out of a second or a third rounder? Like, that's the other thing too. Like, you can get salary cap benefits that allow you to retain your best players or to sign the best free agents if you're not drafting in the first round year in, year out. It's purely that's there. Like, that's proven. But that's just is what it is.
A lot of times if you trade, to pick up extra picks, trade that first round pick, depending on what what your needs were, you have more value by acquiring an extra pick than you would have got out of the first round pick. So
100%,
and they can do that in multiple rounds. One good thing to think about is they traded to move up in the first, but then they traded to get back in the fourth to get Herbig. So I think that you'll see more flexibility and mobility with Kahn and Waddle.
Yeah, I hope so. That to me is just as important as well, because if let's say Tomlin moves on in the next 2 or 3 years, or even the next year, if he doesn't play beyond this deal, they're gonna have to do those. They're gonna have to do those things regardless. And I just think that there's a whole mind. I think it goes to. You might have said that in the show, in the pregame show that we did for the Patriots. It's just that there's a mindset shift that has to happen in this organization.
Definitely.
If we're going to see things better than what we've seen this season, but hopefully you've enjoyed this show. Hopefully we've been talking about this despite the Steelers beating the Patriots, but we will see, because we have recorded that as we mentioned at the start of the show before the Patriots game was played. I'd like to thank Shannon as always for his time, but it was awesome to bring to you a Steelers Global Perspective Encore. I'm Matty P with Shannon White.